Hey everyone, this is the third episode of the Other Animals podcast. I'm Lucy, and today I want to talk about how vegans are perceived by Malzoans, meaning non-vegans, and why we are perceived that way and what it says about vegans and the rest of the world. I'll also get into some actual research that was done on this, because yes, apparently hatred for vegans is such a thing that scientists are interested in researching it. At the end of the episode, I'll talk about what I found to help combat these perceptions in outreach, especially to facilitate rapport and ultimately getting through to Malzoans and pre-vegans. So I'm going to go through the list of negative and positive traits and give my perspective on each trait that people perceive vegans to have. I'm not saying every single person perceives vegans in that light, but these are traits that have been associated with vegans enough to permit us to basically generalize like this. So first I'll go through the negative traits. A lot of people have this perception that vegans are angry. For us to understand that a little bit more, because I'm not denying that a lot of vegans are angry, imagine the human Holocaust or a dog Holocaust was going on, and most people were in on it, meaning they were paying for it to happen, and most people were apathetic about it and refused to change. How would you feel about that? Would you get angry? This is literally what vegans are going through. Also, most people are angry at people who abuse animals, right? When a new story comes out, for example, about a case of animal cruelty, someone tortured a cat or something. Most people are outraged and they're really angry, and then it's not a problem, right? Because we can all see how terrible that is, and it's warranted. But for some reason, when it concerns farmed animals or fish, for example, or animals experimented on or exploited in any way, shape, or form, somehow it's no longer socially acceptable to be angry about that. Another negative trait that people perceive vegans to have is being sanctimonious or self-righteous. Something that's interesting when you think about it is that most people are self-righteous and sanctimonious when it comes to murderers and people who abuse children, for example. But we perceive animals to be so devoid of value, so not worthy of being protected, that any attempt to protect them and their rights are seen as annoying and self-righteous. The third one is extreme. So this one I've received a lot growing up. When I was plant-based, when I was a teen, was back in the 2010s in France. For some reason it was a big thing. Being extreme was a really bad thing. That's always confused me. Because would you say that it's extreme to be completely against child abuse? Would you say it's bad to always be against child labor or always be against slavery? How can you have balance when it comes to slavery? How can you have balance when it comes to child abuse? What's the difference between human animals and non-human animals? That it's too extreme to protect the right of animals to not be treated as property, but it's perfectly reasonable to protect the rights of humans to not be treated as property. Same thing with dogmatic. I've heard that a lot. Vegans are dogmatic, vegans are part of a cult or something. The same thing could be said about being against all rape. Is it dogmatic to say that child marriage is always wrong, for example? Is it cultish to be against animal exploitation, or is it cultish to think that it's okay to torture, exploit, enslave animals for your own benefit? Another trait that people perceive vegans to have is miserable. Often when someone becomes vegan and they understand the atrocities that are happening right now to trillions of animals every year, they might become depressed for a little bit until they figure out how to deal with it. Any compassionate person of any kind gets miserable when they learn that a horrible injustice is happening right now, especially when they feel powerless about changing it. I found for myself that becoming active for the animals was the most empowering thing I've ever done about this. I mean, of course it is the best thing I've ever done for the animals, but for my own mental health, doing activism is the best thing I've ever done as a vegan. So if you feel powerless about what's happening to the animals, and you feel like you can't really do anything to make a dent into that, which I really understand that perspective because I was stuck there for a long time, know that doing anything is better than doing nothing for them. It's going to be better to try something than to just not try to challenge the status quo for the animals. Believe it or not, I'm actually really happy now that I've become a vegan activist. I think I was only this happy when I was a kid. The level of meaning you get from helping the animals in any way you can is something not to underestimate. It's no secret that living a life that's meaningful means living a happy life. And however challenging vegan activism can be at times, it's really amazing to know that you're doing something that is helping the animals. It shouldn't be really something that matters in turning you vegan, but that's something that's helpful to know, I guess. Even if you know of all the atrocities that are going on, at least you can do something about it. In the same vein, vegans are perceived to be sensitive, and by sensitive I mean too sensitive. And that might have to do with dystopia, which is basically the angst of being vegan in a non-vegan world. And probably the same thing was said of anti-slavery campaigners, or anyone that's fought for the rights of any social group, that it's somehow trivial or silly, and that they should basically toughen up because this world is not a kind world or something like that. Kind of in the same vein of like, well, since I'm not going to be someone who's not sensitive enough, meaning someone who is cold-blooded when it comes to the animals, you have to be too sensitive because you care. People also perceive vegans to have some hero or savior complex. Again, would you say that of a human rights activist, that they have a savior complex? Does it matter to the victim that they are campaigning for? And does that justify victimizing animals? Sickly and weak is also another perception people have about vegans. So about this, people love to grab onto anecdotes. So whenever someone who is vegan doesn't look like their definition of someone looking healthy, which depends on the country you're in, by the way. When a healthy looking vegan, whatever that means to the person in particular, comes along, they are usually not remembered if the person does not want to remember them. Also, many unhealthy people are malzoans, meaning non-vegans, and we have studies like actual evidence to show that you can be healthy, if not healthier, on a plant-based diet. If you want to see those studies, go in my description and you should see a list of studies about health. How do you assess someone's health visually? How can you tell that someone who looks really athletic is not about to have a heart attack, which has happened? You really can't. Someone might look really healthy and might not actually be healthy because they might have clogged arteries, for example. And someone could look very pale, for example, because they live in a climate that's not very sunny, for example, or they don't go outside much. Or they might be skinny because they have a high metabolism, or just plenty of other reasons. You can be healthy on a plant-based diet, and you can be unhealthy on a plant-based diet, just like you can be healthy on an omnivorous diet and be unhealthy on an omnivorous diet. It really depends on what you eat. There's somewhat of a bias against vegans here. Vegans are considered weird. Anyone that goes against the grain is considered weird when you think about it. Anyone who dresses in a fashion that is not normal or considered normal is considered weird. Often the people that go vegan are the people that already aren't afraid of going against established norms, and it makes it easier for them to go vegan and to stay vegan for that reason. Malzoans also feel like vegans are mean to them often. Even if a vegan has entered a room and has said nothing yet, Malzoans can feel judged by vegans just by their mere presence, because the presence of a vegan is a statement in and of itself that you can live without exploiting animals. Whenever someone criticizes us as humans, we start to perceive them as the enemy. Also, vegans often are angry, especially new vegans, because of all the atrocities they know of and because of how apathetic people around them are. People they love, so that hurts a lot and that makes you angry. Misanthropic is another one. Again, imagine living in a world where humans are being treated the way we treat animals by some type of group of aliens. Would you start hating those aliens? Probably. Also, it doesn't help that vegans are often made fun of or just hated on. People come up with crazy excuses and become illogical often. So yeah, that doesn't help with misanthropy. Vegans are perceived as idealist hippies, unrealistic. I would argue that that was said of anyone who has been part of a social movement, the suffragettes, the anti-slavery campaigners, etc. Vegan men often receive this criticism that they're not masculine enough because they're vegan or vegan activists. Imagine a world where refusing to exploit and take advantage of women and children is considered unmanly, and in fact weak, where protecting and defending them is unmanly. This is basically the world we live in when it comes to the vulnerable animal victims that vegan men try not to exploit or defend. Is it masculine to exploit what are often vulnerable animals, or to stand up against the majority of your culture and defend them? So of course, this is not an exhaustive list, it's just some stuff that I thought of. With all the BS that comes with being vegan, it's not that hard. It's obviously much harder for the animals. When you really look at it objectively, being a vegan is nothing compared to what the animal victims are going through right now. Also, something that is important to ask ourselves is, do you want confluence with people who would not like you for standing up for the vulnerable and the most oppressed group in the world? Trillions of animals every year. It's very easy to forget about the animal victims because in this world, much of their exploitation and suffering is happening behind closed doors. And by closed doors, I mean behind barbed wire fences and security cameras. Also, if it's hard for you to feel connected to your non-vegan social circle, consider hanging out with single-minded people who actually care about animals' rights not to be treated as property and slaves. Now on the positive traits. Often vegans are perceived to be compassionate, and I mean compassionate towards the victims, because often people perceive vegans to not be compassionate enough towards them, Malzoans. In a situation of injustice, should you be compassionate towards the victim or towards the oppressor? Would you expect from someone who fights against domestic violence to have compassion for the person who beats the women that they're trying to help? Or would you just be happy that they have compassion towards the victims that they're trying to help? Of course, I'm not saying that it's okay to abuse Malzoans or people who abuse animals. I'm saying that it's not fair to require people who try to defend animal victims to feel compassion towards their oppressors. You can treat someone with respect while not feeling any type of positive thing towards them. I think also people see vegans using brutally honest language as some type of abuse. But when you understand the gravity of what's happening to the animals, you become way more understanding of why vegan activists can get brutally honest sometimes. Whether that is the best way to go about it in terms of efficacy is another subject. Vegans might be perceived as brave sometimes because they go against the grain, and people tend to hate vegans, as having integrity because most people say they're against animal abuse, but they don't act accordingly. Vegans are willing to act according to their values. As passionate, vegans are often very angry at the apathy and the amount of victims and suffering they witness, and so it lights up a passion for defending these victims in the best scenario. The worst scenario is often feelings of powerlessness and people becoming stuck in their depression, maybe, especially when you're new vegan. Again, being active is really the best thing to do for you and the animals. Vegans are often perceived as free-spirited because they need to counter the peer pressure and the propaganda from the industries that exploit animals. They need to counter the popularity fallacy, meaning that if most people are for something, then it must be good, kind of fallacy that demands some type of independent thinking. Vegans are obviously perceived to be kind to animals. Of course, veganism isn't about kindness, but it's really about basic justice and decency. You don't need to be kind to see that it's wrong to enslave someone and to not enslave someone. It's just basic decency. But since it isn't seen like that in our Malzoan society, and the option of veganism is seen as an option and not the moral baseline, it seems like this option is a kind option. Vegans are also sometimes perceived to be more eco-friendly because more and more people are starting to discover the fact that animal agriculture is absolutely not sustainable. It's one of the leading causes of environmental destruction and climate change. So, of course, this has very, very little to do with veganism, which is the stance against animal exploitation. But either way, vegans are perceived to be more eco-friendly, which is accurate. And something weird, vegans are often perceived to be healthier. So it depends on the person. Some people might say, well, vegans are not healthy, they're all pale and skinny. And some people might say, well, they are healthier. I think that's because a lot of people on a plant-based diet adopt that diet for health and performance reasons. And they often mistakenly say that they're vegan when they aren't necessarily, meaning they are on a plant-based diet, they're not necessarily against animal exploitation. Some activists also promote a plant-based diet, but that's a subject for another episode. So now I want to talk a little bit about the research that's been done on this. I want to credit Bite Size Vegan's video, The Science of Why People Hate Vegans. It's on YouTube. This is where I got my information about the research on this. She's spent a lot of time making a very good video rich in information about this, and there's all the links to the studies and all the sources in the description of her video, so please go check that out on YouTube. The Science of Why People Hate Vegans. But I'm just gonna be mentioning a few of her points here. Something that was very funny for me to find out was that only drug addicts were evaluated more negatively than vegetarians and vegans. Of course, I need to have a side note about vegetarianism. Vegetarians and vegans are often grouped in the same camp by Malzoans, but really vegetarians are not against animal exploitation, and they still exploit animals, which is what vegans reject. She also mentioned in that video that unlike other forms of bias, hatred towards vegetarians and vegans is not considered a societal problem. It's commonplace and it's widely accepted. There's even vegan bias in the media and in academic research. Researchers have found out that the most hated vegans are vegans for the animals, meaning ethical vegans. Of course, that means actual vegans, because veganism is just that, the stance against animal exploitation. The thing is that most people might not necessarily know that. Some social psychologists think that the negativity towards vegans has less to do with vegans and more to do with what they represent and bring to mind. Basically, vegans trigger cognitive dissonance about exploiting animals. Most people are against animal abuse, and yet exploiting animals is and leads to animal abuse. Researchers actually have a word for that. They call it the meat paradox. The shared value and belief that it's wrong to harm animals is why people hate vegans. When you think about it, when you talk about veganism and they're not vegan, and they get really triggered, that is a good sign that they care. So now I want to talk a little bit about what I found personally in outreach on how to neutralize, to some degree, the perceptions that could hurt the rapport. It's just a few tips, of course not an exhaustive list. I believe that when you build rapport with someone, you have a better chance of getting through to them. I think they will take you more seriously if you don't lose it and you don't start to insult them or become too emotional in the conversation. If you just keep cool and state facts and ask questions, especially using the Socratic method, it shows people that you're the rational one in the conversation, and the self-control that you have makes you look more wise. When you build rapport with someone, what's really cool is that you can get away with way more than if you haven't built rapport. For example, I'm going to refer to Debug Your Brain again. He's an activist on YouTube who has used comparisons of the human Holocaust with the animal Holocaust. He has been talking to people about very challenging things like these, and in a very successful way because he knows how to build rapport. Of course, I think it's extremely important to not shy away from using the correct terms after establishing rapport with someone, like not shying away from saying animal slavery or things like this. I think this is very powerful. The other little tips I have for building rapport is smiling, using humor if possible and when possible, trying to have an open body language, not frowning, nodding to show that you understand what they mean, and seeing them as a pre-vegan really helps as well. If you get angry during a conversation, it can help to also remember that you're staying calm for the animals, not necessarily for the person in front of you, because it might be more effective to stay calm. So yeah, go vegan and advocate for animal rights. We all need to help the animals in any way we can as vegans. Trillions of them are exploited and murdered every year. We're the only ones that they have to change things for them, and we will. So thanks for listening and see ya!